After 13 consecutive days of bombing Iran, the United States stopped the bombing yesterday. So at the same time, the Houthi rebels' attacks on Saudi Arabia and its oil pipelines have escalated significantly. Now, with this ceasefire, what exactly is President Trump planning to do? This is the first topic we're bringing to you today. Second, President Trump is at the White House celebrating a historic milestone for America's small-scale nuclear energy. So what's really going on? What exactly is a small nuclear power plant? And what will be its impact on the world's future? There's actually a very interesting news story behind this that I think everyone should know about. Third, Trump tweeted about the roles of Xi Jinping and Putin behind the war in Iran. Also, a die-hard Trump supporter and influencer, Laura Loomer, recently interviewed Zelensky. She went all the way to Ukraine to interview him, and the stories she revealed are definitely worth hearing. Welcome to Good Morning America with Fang Wei. Oh, my mistake, it's now called Good Afternoon America. Hello to our YouTube viewers, and a happy weekend to our listeners on Sound of Hope Silicon Valley FM 961. This is a more relaxed program, but the information I'm bringing you is still very important. For new viewers, remember to subscribe to Fang Wei's channel so you don't miss the latest news and the deep analysis behind it. All right, let's get into the main topics. President Trump recently stated in the Oval Office that for a larger scale strike against Iran, the bullets are already in the chamber and ready to go at any time. Or, as they say in English, locked and loaded. But President Trump also mentioned that the U.S. is engaged in serious negotiations with Iran, and he hasn't decided whether to launch further attacks. And yesterday, the 14th, was the first night in 14 days that the U.S. stopped its nightly bombing. Before that, it had been 13 consecutive nights. President Trump said any future bombing would be on a massive scale, exceeding the previous operation called Epic Fury. Trump said they, meaning Iran, are looking to negotiate with us, but he feels their sincerity isn't enough yet, meaning he doesn't want to talk just yet. But what does that imply? I think it means if President Trump feels Iran is sincere enough, he will talk to him. Okay, President Trump said, I think Iran's attitude has changed. As the days go by, they will become more and more serious. The reason is obvious. We hit him. Trump said he's in no rush to reach a deal because we have to get it right. He said that currently, regarding dealings with Iran, Vice President Vance and Secretary of State Rubio are both involved. Meanwhile, to the west, the Houthi rebels attacked Saudi Aramco's Jazan oil facility with at least 5 ballistic missiles. Not long after, a second wave of ballistic missiles was launched. The targets were the port of Yanbu by the Red Sea, the Jazan oil facility in Saudi Arabia I mentioned earlier, and another one called Khamis Mushait, which is the King Khalid Air Base. All right, so the 2 ballistic missiles aimed at the Yanbu refinery were successfully intercepted by Saudi Arabia's air defense system. The attack failed to reach its target, and there were no reports of casualties or damage to the facility. At the same time, the Houthi rebels attacked a Saudi oil tanker called the NCC Damam yesterday. The hull sustained minor damage, but it didn't change course and continued sailing. It wasn't hit hard enough to force it to stop. In retaliation, the Saudi-led coalition launched airstrikes on Friday against Houthi military facilities in Yemen's al-Hudaydah province as a form of payback. A Saudi military spokesperson stated that if the Houthi rebels continue these hostile actions, the Saudi coalition will not hesitate to respond. What does this coalition refer to? It's Saudi Arabia and Yemen. The UAE used to be part of it too, but they haven't been very active lately. But regardless, Saudi Arabia is to the north of the Houthis, while the Yemeni government forces are to their east. So that's the situation. This is different from the situation with Iran. If they were to launch a ground war, it could happen at any time. President Trump also issued a threat, saying that if Yemeni militants, meaning the Houthis, launch further attacks, he will hold Iran accountable and impose significant military punishment on both Iran and the Houthi rebels. As I mentioned yesterday, Iranian planes, using civil aviation as cover, secretly flew into Houthi-controlled areas of Yemen. Besides transporting nearly 20 Revolutionary Guard officers, they also brought in gold. Now, the latest news is that they also delivered critical drone technology to help the Houthis develop their own drone strike capabilities. All right, so that's how things stand right now. Yemen is constantly fueling the fire. It seems that under pressure from Iran, they're steadily increasing their offensive capabilities. So now the question is, what will President Trump do? It's all quiet for now. There was talk of a strike over the weekend, but we don't know yet. Trump is still weighing his options. So what's your take on President Trump's considerations? We're back at the same crossroads again. As you can see, I think President Trump is really, like I've said before, he's all bark and no bite. He's actually quite soft-hearted. He hasn't, even up to now, really wanted to completely crush the Iranian regime. Actually, in my personal opinion, he really can't afford to wait any longer. Moving forward, as I mentioned yesterday, Iran follows a sect with an apocalyptic ideology. You can't use a deal, a Western-style deal or transaction to, how should I put it, win over their faith, because their faith is an apocalyptic one. So that's the current situation, but I can only say that I understand President Trump's considerations. After all, Trump is a New York businessman who became president, so he has what you'd call a learning process, and I think he's about 80% there now. Moving forward, I believe he'll eventually complete his learning and handle these matters properly. Anyway, this has once again become a crossroads for President Trump. Actually, it's not even a crossroads, just a fork in the road. So, does he keep going forward, or does he stop and take another path? So, what do you think President Trump will do in this current situation? Should we all share our thoughts on this? One is what you think he will do, and second, what you want him to do. Feel free to express both. Okay, this next news item is actually quite important. On Friday, President Trump announced a historic breakthrough for civil nuclear energy in the U.S. 4 American companies successfully achieved the pilot goals for advanced nuclear reactors, becoming the first privately funded new type nuclear reactors to go into operation in the U.S. in over 40 years. President Trump said that today we're celebrating a historic milestone in civil nuclear technology and the great revival of American nuclear energy. So, what's the story here? President Trump signed an executive order last year directing the Department of Energy to establish a pilot program for advanced nuclear reactors. So the goal now is to complete and build small-scale civil nuclear power plants, which is arguably the hottest topic in the global nuclear energy field today. Whoever can build it first. What exactly is a small-scale civil nuclear power plant? It's a nuclear power plant with a reactor that can output up to 300 megawatts. In English, it's called an SMR, which stands for Small Modular Reactor. What is a modular reactor? I'll explain that in a moment. Compared to traditional large-scale nuclear power plants, its power output, or electricity generation, is only 20 to 50% of theirs, which is why it's called a small reactor. How small is it? Small enough to be transported by truck. So where is it needed most? In remote villages, individual factories, and data centers with very high power demands. What's the core concept? It's factory prefabrication and modularization. Just like building an airplane, various parts and standard modules for the nuclear plant are mass-produced in a factory, then shipped to the site and assembled quickly to become a power plant, lowering costs and shortening construction time. And it uses a very important concept called passive safety design. What is passive safety design? You know, in nuclear power, once a nuclear reaction starts, heat is constantly generated. So you need cooling water circulation, otherwise the heat will eventually cause it to melt down. That's how the nuclear island of Fukushima nuclear power plant collapsed back then. So if you're talking about building a small nuclear power plant right outside your company, and you have to deal with all these pumps and cooling systems, how could you manage that? So that's what's called an active safety design. So these small modular nuclear power plants now are called passive safety designs. What does that mean? It relies on nature, natural cooling. You just leave it there and it cools down on its own. So it doesn't depend on external power sources or water pumps. So the technical requirements for this are actually quite high. But with close cooperation between government departments and energy companies, do you know when the deadline set for this year is? July 4th, the day of the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States? That's the deadline. As it turned out, on that very day, the pilot goals for those four companies all completed testing and final acceptance. Then, 3 weeks later, which is now, Trump announced at the White House that we've reached an important milestone, a key phase of our goal. The Department of Energy announced two things. First, 300 companies were selected for the first batch of President Trump's so-called Genesis mission application proposals. The largest application among them is a 3-year nuclear energy investment worth up to $60 million, which will use AI to help build these small nuclear power plants more quickly and safely, while also reducing operating costs. And behind all this, I think there's a bit of background knowledge to share, which is why are small nuclear power plants so difficult? Some might say, look, the US had nuclear submarines back in the 1950s, right? And now all US aircraft carriers are nuclear powered. Okay, so that means nuclear reactors could have been fitted into a ship long ago. So what's the difficulty in taking them out and making them into a civilian nuclear power plant? It sounds like a very good question, doesn't it? But it just doesn't work. The difference is too great. Why? Because first of all, the uranium used in nuclear submarines or nuclear-powered aircraft carriers is enriched uranium, up to 90%. Because it's at 90%, once nuclear fission occurs, it generates energy very quickly, in large amounts and very powerfully, which can propel the ship and serve as the energy source for a submarine or aircraft carrier. But civilian use can't be like that. It can only use 5%, up to 20% at most. Otherwise, if you were to steal the core of that nuclear reactor, it would be a nuclear weapon. It could easily be turned into one, so it's not allowed. So for military use, it doesn't matter as much, since it's surrounded by the military anyway, right? It's impossible for someone to steal the nuclear fuel rods from a nuclear submarine's reactor. So civilian plants can't produce that much electricity. That's the first issue, so it can't simply be converted for civilian use. And second, military uses, regardless of cost, it involves a very important cooling concept, how to dissipate that heat. That's the first thing. The second is the safety issue, and so on and so forth. Military use is just regardless of cost. It doesn't consider how much it costs to generate 1 kilowatt hour. It's just about making sure the aircraft carrier can operate at sea for 30 years without any problems. But is it feasible for civilian use? Once civilian costs get too high, nobody will use it, right? Because you see, it's not like some government guarantee, guaranteed by taxpayer money. You have to compete with other energy sources. Whether it's oil or diesel, or even something like solar power, and so on, right? If your cost per kilowatt hour is higher than theirs, people won't use yours, and you're out of luck. There are many reasons, but I'm just explaining the situation. In short, you can't just take military tech and call it civilian. So these small power civilian reactors, it's not that simple. The story behind this goes back to the year 2000, 1997, when the Clinton administration started nuclear research on small power reactors. 3 years later, in 2000, the Department of Energy established the Nuclear Energy Research Initiative, funding a 3-year project called the Multipurpose Small Light Water Reactor Project. And then who did they give this money to? It went to the Idaho National Laboratory, Oregon State University, and another consulting firm. The three joined forces for this project, taking the government's money. And a major part of this research was what I mentioned earlier, called passive safety. What's the concept? It's about letting the reactor rely on natural circulation, just the natural weather outside, the air, and the water circulation caused by gravity, using physical properties to let it cool down on its own. Because with small nuclear reactors, as I told you, each one only has an output of 300 megawatts, so they're not that powerful. If you design it properly, then you can cool it down without special equipment, just by relying on the natural external environment. So to conduct this experiment, they built one on the campus of Oregon State University. It was basically a toy reactor. Of course, this toy had no nuclear core. It used electricity to generate heat to see how you design something where water circulates on its own, and then, using power, eventually dissipates the heat. As it turned out, hey, it worked pretty well. That's how it was. 7 years later, in 2007, Oregon State University transferred their exclusive design to a startup company, which is in the White House today, called NewScale Power. And this NewScale Power later, well, raised a lot of money, raising over $3 billion to commercialize it. But in the end, this experiment was a total failure. Starting in 2017, the initial estimate was $3.6 billion to build 12 modules. After 6 years of the experiment, in 2023, the cost eventually soared to $9.2 billion, and then they had nothing to show for it. Plus, there was, post-pandemic inflation, supply chain disruptions, reactor price hikes, and so on. By November 2023, the project was officially canceled. This is just one company, of course, the failure of NewScale, but other small nuclear power plant companies all failed, almost all of them, one after another. So it's basically like announcing SMR, small modular reactors, that this whole industry for these nuclear power plant reactors was a failure, basically gone. But how did it become viable again today? Well, between 2023 and 2024, generative AI exploded. So the power demand for data centers expanded at a staggering rate, right? Tech giants suddenly found themselves being power hogs, needing stable, carbon-free power 24/7, not something dependent on the weather and so on. So this happens to be the strength of nuclear energy. Consequently, massive amounts of capital flooded into what was once a quiet, advanced nuclear energy market. So overnight, these small nuclear plants went from being money-losing idealism to scarce infrastructure for the AI era. Capital, demand, and political will were all in place. Then, after President Trump won the election, the political push came fast and strong. In May of last year, President Trump signed several nuclear executive orders, directing the DOE to establish that reactor pilot program I mentioned, simplifying the permit process, and allocating federal funds to force the industry to speed up. Within a year, the Department of Energy announced a full-scale nuclear renaissance, and then called for bids from 4 companies. All 4 companies were required. And who are these 4 companies? One is called TerraPower, the second is Kairos, the third is X Energy, and then there's NewScale I mentioned. All had to have their reactors ignited, reaching criticality before Independence Day this year. As it turned out, wow, the 4 companies rushed the work until the early hours of July 4th, and they actually all passed that day. Yeah, all passed that day, or just barely made it. Anyway, 3 weeks later, which is today, Friday, President Trump announced that we've reached a historic milestone. This is the background story behind yesterday's signing ceremony at the White House. Of course, reaching this stage can be called a successful ignition, crossing the threshold, but not a single kilowatt hour has been generated yet. So what does this mean? It means America's small nuclear plants have crossed the steps of paper design and getting government licenses and are now entering the phase of initial construction and ignition demonstration. But right now, not a single one, not one yet, can connect to the grid and sell its first kilowatt hour of commercial power. Because to actually supply power, those passive cooling systems I mentioned, including large components like steam turbines, all have to be built. And finally, successfully assembled and then finally connected to the grid. And the key is the cost issue. If you can't compete with other energy sources, nobody's going to buy your product. And the way to save costs is through scaling up, right? Because all of this is very complex. It's really like building the first Boeing 747, which is very expensive. But if the whole world is constantly buying Boeing planes from you, up to 500 or 1,000 of them, then you won't find it expensive, and you'll be willing to take that first flight, right? So it's the same concept. So this first nuclear reactor needs to be modularized, yet it's so complex, needing to solve so many problems, such challenging problems. So nuclear plants, small nuclear plants, are like playing with fire, right? Playing with fire without any danger. So there really are massive technical challenges involved here. Okay, so what's needed here is, if there are enough buyers, then there's no hesitation in investing. If there aren't enough buyers, then it won't work. But everyone is waiting for you, right? I'll buy it once you've succeeded. So R&D needs buyers, but buyers wait for successful R&D. So what do? So now it's just venture capital gambling on it, or big companies gambling on it. So now, but regardless, this time there really has been a major breakthrough. The industry's general expectation now is that the first commercial power supply will be around 2027. From next year to starting next year to around 2030, it will gradually appear. But once it's settled, it'll be truly incredible. We all know the whole Iran war, the Strait of Hormuz, they're all centered around oil, right? So if these small nuclear plants take off, if they can really be modularized, really be easily assembled and so on, and then costs drop with high volume, once the cost per kilowatt hour drops, meaning the equipment cost drops, then of course the cost per kilowatt hour drops, and that would be incredible. So this is another innovative energy option where the United States is leading again. We all know about America's shale oil. Once that was settled, it was incredible, turning the U.S. from an oil importer into the world's largest oil production site, and it will become the largest oil exporter in the future. So add nuclear energy to that, and it'll be even more amazing. So this really is great news for the United States, a major development. So to put it simply in one sentence, the stove is now lit, but it's not time to celebrate just yet. Not the moment. There is another 1 to 3 years to go. All right, Feng Wei, will continue to follow the progress in this area for you. And for our viewers, if you're very familiar with nuclear energy, you're also welcome to leave a comment. Regarding what I just said, if you have anything to add or any corrections, you're welcome to. Or if there's any other information on this, please leave a comment. All right, let's learn about this major thing together. I think its significance is no less than that of shale oil. So once it goes from what's called from 0 to 10,000, right? Now it's 0 to 1. Almost at the point of achieving that one. Once that one is achieved, then from 0 to 10,000, well, the rest will be much faster. I think the costs in this area might even be much more convenient than shale oil in the future. Okay, well, next, let's look at President Trump warning Xi Jinping and this person called Putin. I've labeled this warning a mild warning. But the meaning of mild, its an inherent meaning is not mild at all. It's very severe. So, President Trump said Friday on his social media platform, Truth Social, he said, President Xi Jinping, told me during our recent meeting in Beijing that he would not, under any circumstances, provide or sell weapons to Iran. His statement also includes Chinese companies. Given our relationship, I believe what he said. See, Trump is flattering him, putting him on a pedestal. Besides, I'm also doing him a big favor. It's not him helping me, I'm helping him. We're even. Then he continued, Russian President Putin also told me he won't sell weapons to Iran. Trump said, the terrible war in Ukraine is still going on. But Putin knows the United States didn't sell weapons to Ukraine, but rather to NATO countries. As for how they use them, well, we don't know. The last sentence was, if they were involved in providing weapons to Ukraine, it would be very bad for them and definitely not in their best interest. So what does this mean? The first point of this is saying, I know you, Xi Jinping and Putin, are giving weapons to Iran. The second is that you both promised me otherwise. So the third point is that you're breaking your word, and that makes me very unhappy. The third point is, as you can see, the wording is very mild because he doesn't want to flip the table on him. It means I'm using a mild tone to show a very stern attitude. I don't want to flip the table, but you should know that I know everything. So this is Trump's strategy. Whether it's for Ukraine, Russia, or the CCP, Trump is using a bit of a soft policy now. But it's not true softness or appeasement. It's to act against them when the time is right. So that's the situation. So next, a MAGA influencer, an internet celebrity named Laura Loomer, recently spent over 30 hours traveling from the United States to Ukraine, including taking cars and trains. She went to the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv, and did a 40-minute interview with Zelensky. As you can see, this is really interesting. This woman, Trump really trusts her. She's a diehard MAGA supporter, totally dedicated to making America great again. So Laura Loomer's first question was, tell us, we gave you so much money back then, referring to the Biden era. Explain to us how giving you money helps make America great again. She said, we don't have money either, so explain that to us. So her conversation with Zelensky was quite interesting. I'll briefly summarize the key points for you. The first question was like this. Zelensky responded with 2 points. He said, you have to understand, what does Putin want? He wants to restore the Soviet Union, to bring back the old Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union back then was a threat to the whole world. Then he said, of course, it won't affect the United States immediately, but it will affect Europe, and ultimately, it will impact American interests. But you should know, he said, Ukraine is a wall. If you hold this wall now, the Soviet Union won't be restored. It won't reappear. That's the first reason. The second one is our drone technology. He said our drone technology is very powerful. We share it without reservation with the American military personnel, the American Army. He said, we used our lives, so many people died. We learned these drone combat techniques with our lives, but the United States can now learn them completely without losing lives. He said, we are not holding back. It's called exclusive, and it's shared exclusively with the United States military. The United States can now produce 300,000 drones every year, while Ukraine can produce 8 million. That's the situation. Then he said the strike range of Ukraine's drones, the flight distance, he said it's 1,000 kilometers now. It will reach 4,000 kilometers by the end of this year, and soon it will reach 5,000 and 10,000 kilometers. That is, drones will be like intercontinental missiles in the future. They can strike from one continent to another. So looking at Ukraine's drones, if they reach 4,000 or 5,000 kilometers, they will have already reached Siberia. If they reach 5,000 to 10,000 kilometers, the whole of Russia will be under Ukraine's strike range.